They'd become very thin-skinned very quickly. Now they take offense to being asked the same questions that they were asking the government when they were in opposition. I asked him, what motor cars do you drive and how much are they worth? He then made a big issue about the fact that the car he drives is 7 years old and it's got 130 kilometers. That's neither here nor there.
Good afternoon, goeiemiddag almal. Welcome to the #1 media company where we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. Today, we have with us a member of parliament representing ActionSA, Athol Trollip. He just assured me he is also the provincial chairperson of ActionSA representing the Eastern Cape. There were some talks, I don't know if that's a promotion or not, that you were going to be moved to the Senate of ActionSA. Perhaps, I don't know, Athol, is that a promotion to be moved to the Senate?
Yeah, look, let me explain that. We have a Senate, which is the highest decision-making body in our party outside of an elective conference. We're a new party. We're not even a 4-year-old party yet. So we've all been appointed interim. I'm an interim chairperson of the Eastern Cape. I am a member of the Senate by virtue of being a chairperson of the Eastern Cape. I'm also a member of Senate by virtue of being the parliamentary leader of the ActionSA caucus. So I head up the caucus in the National Assembly. So if I wasn't on as a provincial chairperson, I would be represented on Senate as the leader of the parliamentary team. So yeah, a Senate member. I don't know if it's a promotion. It's just a really important body because it is the body that takes decisions in our party, contrary to popular belief. Mr. Mashaba isn't an autocrat or a dictator that takes all the decisions. We take decisions in the Senate, and then it gets carried out by the party.
Okay. Interesting. I can't sort of refuse to take a bit of a dig into that. A person like Helen Zille would say, okay, but Mashaba might not be an autocrat in terms of the decision-making process, but he appoints the people to the Senate. So doesn't he then influence the decision-making process? It appoints people who agree with him. Someone from the Democratic Alliance would argue.
Yeah, look, I'm not here to talk about the Democratic Alliance. I'm here to represent ActionSA. I was in the DA for 38 years. I know the DA as well as anybody else. I know the role of Helen Zille in the DA better than anybody else. And I believe that ActionSA is a democratic organization, as democratic, if not more democratic, than the Democratic Alliance. So I'm very happy where I am. I believe that we have structures that make it democratic, and we take democratic decisions. And I've seen the Senate turn down proposals by Herman Mashaba on a number of occasions. So I believe that we are a democratic organization, and I wouldn't belong to an organization that wasn't democratic.
Okay, interesting. Athol, can you give us some context, bring some light to this recent Blue Light Brigade incident with John Steenhuisen? Can you give us some context there for our viewers who haven't heard this story?
Yeah, there was some interesting response, and I read very carefully what the media had to say about it. And the Daily Maverick reported positively on it, and then Alec Hogg from Biz News was very negative about it. In fact, he called it bullshit. So Hogg for to have an interview with him. I don't know if you saw that interview, but essentially what came out of it was that I think he was fed a bit of misinformation. First of all, we are an opposition party, and in the regard to the blue lights and travel and the perks of being a minister, we asked all the minister in the GNU, all of them, not just to John Steenhuisen. We asked them how many cars they had at their disposal, how much the cars were worth, do they have blue lights installed, and do they use the blue lights, and a number of other questions related to their motor vehicles. John Steenhuisen, the Minister of Agriculture's department, gave us a comprehensive response. When we issued the statement about John Steenhuisen's response, we attached my parliamentary question with his comprehensive response. So we were withholding no information. The reason why I put out the statement about John Steenhuisen's response was very simple, because some political parties don't have any issue about driving around in blue light vehicle convoys. I mean, the ANC do it, a number of the other political parties, it's not a matter of concern for them. But the Democratic Alliance has a policy that they do not use blue lights. I know that because I was a mayor for the Democratic Alliance, and I was also in the leadership of the Democratic Alliance. And when I became the mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, I removed the blue lights from my vehicle, because you can't say that your policy position is you don't use blue lights, and then in an answer to a parliamentary question, you say, I have them in my vehicle, I don't use them, I've instructed my drivers not to use them, but in the event of a life or death situation or an emergency, they are there to be used. Now, the spokesperson for the Democratic Alliance, Mr. Willie Okamp, was very clear about that in a debate in this regard, where he said the vehicles are there. There's a provision in the ministerial handbook for vehicles. There's a provision for the installation of blue lights and having VIP protection officers. And the DA will only use them in the event of an emergency. Now, what I said to Alec Hogg, I took exception to him saying that asking those questions was bullshit or puerile, because I sent him about 120 questions that were previously asked by the DA and by members of the DA who are in the cabinet to ANC cabinet ministers before they joined the GNU. Almost exactly the same question. How many cars? Do they have blue lights? What are your travel expenses? What are your oversized travel expenses, etc.? So I said, those are the questions that are the role of the opposition. And I gave him a whole lot, nearly 120 examples. But I went further to say to him that, can you imagine an American politician who is a member of the anti-gun ownership lobby saying that the constitutional provision in the United States to bear arms is unacceptable and that people should not be allowed to bear arms? And then that politician is then caught wearing a firearm. And when challenged, the politician would say, I don't support the ownership of guns and I don't use guns, but I carry one here for self-protection only in the case of life or death or emergency. It would undermine your credibility. It would turn you into a hypocrite overnight. And as far as I'm concerned, the so-called spat with John Steenhuisen had absolutely nothing to do with John Steenhuisen. It was sent to the Minister of Agriculture, and I issued a statement about his department and him using vehicles that have blue lights installed. Minister Groenewald from the Freedom Front Plus, on the other hand, he answered and said he's had his taken out of his vehicle, so he cannot use a blue light. And that's the way you put an issue beyond doubt. You can't say you're against gun ownership, but you carry a gun, or you're against using blue lights, but you drive a vehicle with blue lights. It's like saying, I don't use my handbrake on my car, but it has one, and in the case of emergency, I'll use the handbrake. It's absolutely nonsense.
Okay, interesting. Now, I understand your point. So how do we resolve this? Because the danger here is it becomes a he said, she said story. So is there a process wherein we can resolve this? I assume in Parliament, perhaps you can give some context there, but I've seen there's a step.
There's nothing to resolve. Yeah, absolutely nothing to resolve. I asked a very candid question. It's there on the parliamentary record. His department answered it frankly. It's there on the parliamentary record. I never asked him whether he bought the motor cars. I asked him, what motor cars do you drive and how much are they worth? He then made a big issue about the fact that the car he drives is 7 years old and it's got 130,000 kilometers. That's neither here nor there. I asked him the value of the motor car. And the fact of the matter is, one of these days, those motor cars will be written off by the department because they have excessive mileage, and there is provision for that even in the ministerial handbook. And once they're written off and sold, the Department of Agriculture will have to buy the minister a vehicle again, and the department will incur costs. Because I don't have a problem with the minister having a vehicle. The minister needs a vehicle to do his job. But remember, also, there was an instance in a public video where John Steenhuisen was videoed exiting a meeting in Limpopo and getting into a very modest Toyota Cross hired vehicle. And the journalist who asked him said, this is very unusual. Why aren't you driving a black luxury vehicle like ministers do? And he made a point of saying, I hire this modest vehicle to save my department money, so there's more money to perform what we have to perform as a department. So when I asked him those questions, he went overboard a little bit, I think, and he was protesting a bit much by telling us the mileage and the kilometerage, and he didn't buy them, he inherited them, he got them there. Of course he didn't buy them, he's only just been a minister since the other day. But in future, his department will have to buy new vehicles, and he will drive a new vehicle if he's still the minister in 6 or months or years' time. They will have to buy new vehicles because they've exceeded the limitation of kilometerage according to government handbooks.
Okay, interesting. So you're fulfilling the roles and the functions of a loyal opposition. You just ask questions and you just feel Mr. Steenhuisen was a bit too sensitive and Mr. Groenewald answered you appropriately. Did you get appropriate responses from the other ministers? Did you ask them as well?
All the ministers, and as often happens in Parliament, some answer expeditiously and comprehensively. Others give you evasive answers, and some don't answer, so you have to resubmit those questions. You're only allowed so many questions in a parliamentary period, which is an annual period, and you get an allowance of how many questions you can ask proportionately to the size of your party. I can't just ask 100 questions a week. So, sometimes they give us a runaround. And what I found interesting in this regard, Donald, was that, the DA was a very good opposition, very, very good opposition. They built a reputation on being a strong opposition over many years. And I was part of that opposition. I was the leader of the opposition in that party. So they have a very proud track record in that regard. But now they find themselves in the ranks of government. And what bemused me was that they've become very thin-skinned very quickly. Now they take offense to being asked the same questions that they were asking the government when they were in opposition. And they must just get used to it because they've taken a decision to go into government. And now they're going to be treated as a governing party by the opposition parties. It just, it goes with the terrain.
That sounds fair. And taking that to the broader subject of the government of national unity, what is your criticisms? What do you think they're doing right, and what do you think they're doing wrong? In your opinion, I assume you're speaking about on ActionSA. What are they doing right? What are they doing wrong?
Okay, so let me start with the easy one. I think what the GNU has probably done right, and it's still early days. They've only been in government for about 6 months. So it's still very early days, but I think South Africans sighed a huge sigh of relief that the government of national unity was brought about and created by the ANC partnering with the DA, the IFP, the PA, the Freedom Front Plus, and a few other political parties. They have 9 partners. I think the ANC have 9 partners. So I think the country sighed a sigh of relief that it wasn't ANC, MKP, EFF. But that's about the only thing that's been positive with the GNU, unfortunately. And I really don't want to be acerbic and critical and negative. But if we're honest with ourselves, 6 months have gone by. We have seen no major policy shifts. We've seen no improvement in our economic growth or job creation or reduction in crime. The stats are all going in the wrong direction, and nobody can gainsay that. You can go and ask me on any subject. I don't believe that the GNU can point to one single success that has come about because of the GNU, other than a feeling of hope and positivity. The other matter of grave concern is around the fact that our cabinet is still so big. It's bigger than ever before. 32 members of cabinet, 43 deputy ministers. We had a caucus strategic session over the last 2 days. And we've taken a decision. We're not going to answer questions about deputy ministers. We don't see any value in having deputy ministers. We've seen no deputy minister adding any value whatsoever. In fact, I challenge every member of parliament to even name 10 of the 43 deputy ministers off their head. They wouldn't get it right.
Well, let's start with the ministers.
Now, we'll come to ministers as well, but while I'm on the subject of deputy ministers, we in ActionSA don't believe we should have any deputy ministers. That's our manifesto position. And we also believe that there shouldn't be more than 20 cabinet positions. Many bigger countries in the world don't have anything near the size of the cabinet that we do. and it costs too much money. And all the perks that go with the size of that cabinet, we believe are indefensible, especially in light of the poverty and unemployment and inequality that we see in our country. So that's been a big negative. And then we've seen no change in how corruption is dealt with. I'll give you some recent examples. Minister Ntshavheni, who's very close to the president, she's a minister in the presidency, she has been implicated by the National Prosecuting Authority for corruption. And the docket has been referred to the Directorate of Public Prosecutions for a decision on prosecution. The High Court in Limpopo has found that she irregularly awarded tenders when she was the city manager. And we're putting pressure on the president to take action and to suspend her. You know, I'll remind him and the ANC that they have a step-aside policy. They seem to have forgotten that, because with the VBS heist and her getting a dodgy loan from somebody who was investing her municipal money into VBS, the president did nothing. He said that he wanted time and space to consider it, but he's known about it since 2021. I then wrote to the public protector. They declined to investigate, but later have committed to me to investigate the matter. What did Cyril Ramaphosa do? He didn't suspend her. He didn't ask her to step aside. He simply moved her sideways from justice to Department of Housing. So I see no new behavioral patterns in the GNU. And in fact, if you listen to President Zuma overseas recently this week, he said that the ANC is still in control. If you listen to Fikile Mbalula, he basically says they're still hulle slaan die Qatar in die regering van nasionale eenheid. So they're all bragging about that. They're saying that we can do without the DA. And the reality is that the GNU could stand without the DA. The GNU could stand without the IFP. Yeah. So there's enough. The GNU has got 70% support. It's the biggest bloc of government we've had since 1994. They're a very powerful bloc. And one would think that with such a powerful bloc and such a high number of partners, that those partners would have been able to negotiate some improvements. The DA haven't been able to do anything. I mean, we've seen them buckle on the Bella Act. They said it was a red line. That red line has now become red lipstick because nothing's happened. The president signed it into effect. So, I'm afraid to say the GNU can't poke a finger at any success since they came into effect.
But I mean, Athol, they've had a huge success in terms of Home Affairs reducing the processing times. I mean, no government has ever been able to do that. And I might be saying that with a hint of sarcasm.
Well, you know, I find that extremely ironic, and I find it so amazing that you just made that statement, because before I came onto the show, I was writing to Leon Schreiber, the Minister of Home Affairs, to say to him that I am now at my wit's end because of two people that have applied for passports at overseas or foreign embassies, South African passports, South Africans applying for renewal of their passports, and they've both been waiting for over a year. Okay, I understand that Leon Schreiber has only been the minister for 6 months, but his officials write to me when I ask him about these things, and they say that any application for documentation at an overseas embassy can take up to 6 months because it has to be done manually and it has to be couriered backwards and forwards. And I understand that. But these two cases are over a year old, and I've been writing to Minister Schreiber and Mr. Anele Zondi and Mrs. Van Wyk in Mr. Schreiber's office to no avail. These people are wanting to travel back to South Africa for family reunions, important, and they do not have documentation, and they've been waiting for over a year. So I will grant that there has been some improvement at Home Affairs at a local level. There's been some streamlining. I know Minister Schreiber is very strong on technological advancements, and there's been some improvement at a local level. If you're a South African and you want to go to Home Affairs and get documentation, I believe it is better. There are still many allegations and complaints of having to queue and the what do you call it, where you have to pay for a place in the queue. It's like an extortion racket. So it's not all fixed. It's not all fixed. So there's been an improvement locally, but I want to tell you internationally, my experience has been it's like pulling hen's teeth in the Department of Home Affairs to get any response. And I mean, I even had some very strong words with the minister because he misinterpreted some of my communication to him in this regard. But I'm a member of Parliament. I don't make these things up. When a member of the public writes to you about a frustration they have with the Department of Home Affairs, it's not something that I've created as a member of the opposition to make the minister look bad. And 9 times out of 10, every single Home Affairs query is definitely time-bound. It's time-bound to catching a flight, time-bound to having documentation for a certain thing. I'll give you another classic example now that we're on the subject so that there's no misconception. And I'm not bad-mouthing anyone. My sister is a widow, and she married a widower recently. I was at the wedding, and they had their death certificates of their late spouses. But when the minister went to register the marriage, Home Affairs said that they were both still married. Now, that caused considerable trauma. She contacted me and said, what can we do? I referred her to an official in the Department of Home Affairs, and the official initially wasn't very helpful. Then I wrote to them again, and then he was very helpful, and the matter was resolved. So there are areas that I can attest to where people are getting service and getting it done, and well done. But I'm not here to applaud a fish for swimming. If you're the Minister of Home Affairs, you must make sure that Home Affairs can process the man in the street's requests expeditiously without trauma. And I've given you some classic cases right here. And as I said, I was writing to him right now, minutes before we started this interview.
And some great examples. And I think to tie to your point, I think a lot of people, I mean, we're used to, this is now a new thing in South Africa, this government of national unity, a coalition government at national level. But I think for South Africans to understand, usually you compromise on policy positions, not managerial getting things done. So, I mean, all credit to the DA forwarding these positions, but it's like usually, I don't know, like the DA stands for a 15% tax and the ANC stands for a 20% tax, and they meet each other halfway. I mean, the fact that a DA gets something done as at the ministerial level is not, it's great, but they can do more than that. I mean, perhaps I'm being wrong here, but I mean, you can compromise on policy positions, not the fact that you're just simply doing your job as a bureaucrat or as a minister.
Yeah, so look, I have some experience with coalitions. I was a mayor in Nelson Mandela Bay, and I led a coalition government, a very small coalition government, only 4 participating parties. And that coalition fell apart because one of the parties was not honoring the coalition agreement. And coalitions fall apart if parties they undertake to do. Now, I think the GNU is going to come under increasing pressure because of the arrogance of the ANC. The ANC is very arrogant. They've been in government for a long time. They've had unfettered power. They believe they have a hereditary right to govern. So their attitude is not good. And one of the things that's going to bring the GNU under some more pressure, like the Bila bill, is the fact that Parks Towers now conceptualized a new tax which amounts to an additional 3% tax on companies. And that tax is going to go to black business transformation. And the DA has indicated that they are totally opposed to that. They've raised the fact that it's another red line. So one of 2 things can happen, or one of 3 things can happen. One, the ANC can change its policy that Parks Towers now proposed and make it more sensible. Or the DA can simply say, if you don't change this policy position, it's anathema for us, and we're not going to continue in the GNU and leave the GNU. Or they can just simply accept it and carry on like they did with the Bila bill. So those are the things that will face the DA. But as I said before, if the DA did leave the GNU would still stand. And there are other political parties waiting to GNU. So I believe the GNU is going to be forever and ever with the now. But I think that ActionSA, we made a good decision on reflection not to get involved in the GNU, and I'll tell you why we think that's a good decision. In Parliament, there are two major blocks now. One is the GNU with, as I said, 10 parties or 9 or 10 parties, and they make up 70% of the parliamentary representation. And the other block is the MKP and the EFF that make up around 20-odd percent, 24%, with a few of the small other parties that are in that so-called progressive caucus. It's actually more like a regressive caucus if you look at constitutional legislation and have some newfangled Zuma conception of democracy. And then ActionSA is the biggest party that is in the middle. That's not aligned to either of those blocks. We're only 6-member parliament, but we're a significant part of parliament now because we are the pivot right in the middle between these two massive blocks of power. And there's a massive deficiency in the opposition because the EFF have proven to be a noisy opposition, but not an effective opposition. And MK have arrived in Parliament and they have no experience of being in opposition. And they are now emulating the noise of the EFF, but they have more internal problems than I think any of the other parties. SA is actually in a very important position. And that's why we're having these discussions with other political parties about trying to find collaboration, areas of collaboration, and cooperate parties that are not aligned to the GNU or to the regressive caucus. So last week, we had an amalgamation and a merger of ActionSA and the Forum for Service Delivery. And, they're not a big political party, but they are represented at local government level with about 38 councillors, which is more than some of the parties that are represented in Parliament have. 101 public representatives, including our MPs and 4 members of provincial legislatures. So all of a sudden, we've gone from 101 public representatives to 139. Now, that's a big jump overnight. And we are having discussions this weekend with 2 other political parties in Parliament about future cooperation. We're having a trilateral meeting with them, and I'm gone before this meeting that we're going to have on Friday and Saturday. And if ActionSA can be part of bringing the people in the middle of South African politics at the fulcrum between, or the pivot between the big GNU that shows no appetite for change or accountability or dealing with corruption and improving service delivery, and the regressive caucus that has shown that they're really not up to being an effective opposition, let alone being able to govern properly. So I'm excited about the role that we are fulfilling in South African politics right now.
Are those 2 parties, Rise Mzansi and BOSA, that might join you?
That's correct. We are having meetings with them, whether we will find it. But I do want to say I've also extended an invitation to a number of other political parties in Parliament to become part of a joint caucus in the National Assembly. We've been there for 6 months now, and we've identified some other political parties who seem to have a similar take to us on a number of issues, not all the issues, but on a number of issues. And the response has been pretty positive, that we can meet once a month as opposition parties to talk about how we can best use our speaking time, our questions, and how we can be more strategic as opposition parties in Parliament. So, yeah, some very exciting developments, and I'm happy to be part of it.
Athol, just help me understand, because there was a lot of optimism, optimism for ActionSA that some people spoke about it might get 20% of the vote in 2024, that it might be the main opposition party. And yeah, that obviously didn't happen. So what do you think went wrong there, and how do you aim to rectify those mistakes? I assume those were mistakes. How do you aim to rectify those mistakes? And with Rise Mazanzi Bosa or whoever joins you, you become now under the party you were destined to be, that 10 or 20% party.
Yeah, so look, I think that's a very important question. And I want to remind you, Donald, that the party I belonged to before for 38 years was the PFP, then it became the DP, then it became the DA. In 1994, the DP returned 7 members of parliament, and they had been around for a long, long time. And prior to that, there were times when Helen Sisman was the only member of parliament. So ActionSA, as their very first time ever in a national election, we returned 6 members of parliament. I'm very proud of that. And in those days, in 1994, the DP called their 7 members the Magnificent 7. We call ours the Super 6. And I remember Herman Mashaba telling me to go there and perform like we are 60. And when I look at the results over the last 6 months, we asked exactly the same number of parliamentary questions as the MKP. And MKP is 10 times bigger than we are. We have 6 members, they have 59 members. So we are boxing like a 60-member caucus. But let me go back to our election results. Maybe we were flattered by the fact, and I wasn't even a member of ActionSA then. In fact, I was completely out of politics in the 2021 election, where Herman Mashaba and ActionSA managed to garner around 20% in Johannesburg. Now, that was an unbelievable election result. It shocked everyone. And we managed to get councillors in Tshwane, Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, even in a eThekwini municipality for a first time ever. And I mean, that was shortly after COVID, and the party was only launched after the People's Dialogue took place during COVID. So, yeah, maybe we expected to do way better. You asked us what mistakes we made. Well, I think the success of Herman Mashaba and ActionSA in 2021 was that they only selected municipalities to contest, and they did really well because they focused their resources in those 6 municipalities. In 2024, we decided to contest all 9 provinces, and I think that might have been a stretch. It might have spread our resources a bit thinly, and I think we learned a lesson from that. So,
if you were forced to choose, what provinces would you have chosen?
No, well, I mean, it's a completely hypothetical question, so I'm not even going to go there. But 2026 is coming, and what we have identified is that we need to motivate and identify which wards we're going to contest and which municipalities we're going to contest. So I can tell you right now, we are going to cut out a lot of municipalities where we won't even put up candidates. And, you know, it doesn't really help getting one councillor in a municipality in a deep rural area, for example, or even in an urban area that is dominated by the ANC, who have 80% or 70%, and your one councillor can do nothing. That doesn't really help and can't make a difference. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that if you give me a minute. But so in 2026, we are going to make some provisions that we have learned from in 2021. We're not going to put up candidates in wards where we can't do well, and we are not going to contest municipalities that are broken that we will not be able to fix. So we're going to concentrate our resources, and we're going to be a lot more strategic. What we have done strategically, and it did cause a lot of pain, and, you know, Herman Mashaba said today at our strategic planning that if you fail after trying, there's no dishonor in that. Fail after trying. But if you fail to try, then there's a lot of dishonor. So what we did in Tshwane, the city of Tshwane, when we discovered that the ANC or the DA was going behind our backs, because we were in a coalition with the DA, talking to the ANC about forming a local government of local unity in Tshwane without us, Herman Mashaba said over his dead body, he's not going to be backstabbed again by the DA. So we negotiated a new dispensation in Tshwane. And what has happened in Tshwane is precisely what the DA did in the city of Cape Town. We as a party have said we need a reference point. We need to show South Africans that where we govern, we can govern well. And Dr. Nasipi Moya is turning Tshwane around. There's already a marked improvement in Tshwane, and people are starting to talk about it. Like they did in the city of Cape Town, the strategy back then was to win Cape Town through a coalition, then merge with those parties and assimilate others, and build a city that works, a shining city on the hill. We're doing exactly the same thing in Tshwane, so that by the time 2026 comes, the people of Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni and eThekwini, which is not so far from Durban, from Johannesburg, will be able to see. You know, when people drive from Tshwane to Johannesburg and the road traffic lights, street lights are on in Tshwane and they don't work in Joburg, when the traffic lights work in Tshwane and they don't work in Joburg or Ekurhuleni, people will see the difference. It's going to be a marked difference. Now, the EFF, on the other hand, in the last 10 years that they've been around, they have meticulously shied away from taking on the responsibility of government. And that's affected them really negatively because they've got nothing to show where they govern that they can govern. Yes, they are in a couple of coalitions, but they hold no real authority in any of those coalitions.
There probably has been now, with all those people now swinging to MK.
Yeah, another important thing which has shaken South African politics around a lot is that the 2024 elections brought the ANC below 50% for the first time. So the political landscape has changed. You now have to negotiate with all political parties to put governments together. So you see governments where, you know, the DA said they'd never govern with the PA. They are governing with the PA now. Herman Mashaba said he'd never govern with the ANC. We are governing with the ANC now. So things have changed. And, politics is not static. Politics is fluid, and you need to adapt or die. And we are adapting. And I think that we will be able to show by 2026 that ActionSA mayor with EFF, ANC, and other political parties can make a city work. What city? The capital city. So I think you must watch that space. That's going to be a very important. Nasipi Moya is impressing friend and foe, but most importantly, the people of Tshwane are starting to see the difference. It's cleaner. It works better. The people of Hammanskraal have now got water for the first time in many, many years. It's fresh, potable water. They're not going to contract cholera from the water that they get from the Tshwane municipality. So we're very proud of those advancements.
Fantastic. Just so that I understand you, it seems like you're making more of a technical argument. Okay, if ActionSA just didn't have contested all these wards or all these provinces, it would have done a lot better. But some would argue, okay, but it was your policy positions or your ideology that was the problem. So you don't seem to think it was ideology, it was just practical, technical problems. It wasn't ideology. I mean, some people would say, okay, you didn't really try to find a market, and some statements were leftist, quote unquote leftist, and some statements were on the right. And you didn't really find a niche, as it were. So you don't think it was ideology that was the problem?
No, I think not. I think the only ideological questions might have arisen after the election when it came to the matter of Tshwane, because the DA's nose was very out of joint, that we were now working with the ANC, for example, the same ANC that they're working with in the GNU. So it amazes me that some political parties are allowed to work with the ANC and others aren't. But that's a lesson that South Africans will learn as we grow up politically and mature. But here's the other point that I think you seem to miss, that the election of 2024 was an incredibly difficult election. The ANC came below 50%. The EFF declined. The DA grew fractionally.
Well, technically they didn't grow. I think number of votes they didn't grow.
they will argue that they got one or two members more in parliament or in legislatures, but they certainly did not grow to a point where they could become the multi-party charter government or the moonshot that they conceived.
Yeah.
So the IFP grew nominally. The Freedom Front Plus declined. ACDP declined. Patriotic Alliance grew. They came to parliament for the first time with 9 members of parliament. So the PA were a big winner in this last election, and the MKP arrived on the scene with 15.4%. So that's a big chunk of South African votes that parties like ActionSA and other political parties, including the DA, thought that they would be able to get. We didn't get them. So that's a reality. You learn from reality, and the political terrain has changed dramatically in South Africa. And we need to adapt to that. And that's, I think, one of the other reasons why we are having trilateral meetings with other political parties, because we need to understand that the next election is going to be very different to the past one. And the past one was infinitely different to the previous one. So as South Africans, especially South Africans that in their majority used to vote for the ANC, that are becoming poorer and more unemployed people, more and more people battling for access to healthcare, access to schooling for their children, the issue around illegal immigration. These are big issues that are turning off voters that used to vote blindly for the ANC. And then, of course, there's some political parties in this country that are niche political parties. They are either ethnic, or they're racial nationalist organizations, or they are fundamentalist organizations that appeal to a small group of people that will vote for them through thick and thin. And then there's the real art of becoming a party that can attract votes from black and white communities and colored communities, English, Xhosa, Afrikaans, isiZulu, multicultural political parties that can attract a cross-section of support. And ActionSA is aiming to be that. And it's very difficult because, sadly, if you reflect on South African politics post-1994 or pre-94, we were probably the most divided nation in the world under legislation that kept us divided. Now, after 1994, we have no such legislation. We have a constitutional democracy where everyone has exactly equal rights. We are more polarized than ever before. And if you look at the number of parties in parliament, and you look at the number of interest group parties in parliament that represent only a certain interest, you will realize that politics is more polarized than ever before in South Africa. And we're on a mission as ActionSA to depolarize politics because, we seem to have normalized the abnormal in South Africa under the ANC government. The ANC government has normalized poverty and disparity and inequality. Now, that is unacceptable. And we want to denormalize what has become the normal in South Africa. And that's a big challenge for ActionSA. We're up for that fight, and we are going to do everything in our power. And I believe as more and more South Africans see us dealing with those issues that normalize the abnormal, we will attract more and more votes.
Okay. Good luck. And I mean, I don't mean that facetiously or patronizingly. By all means, good luck. I'm just just curious, did Gator McKenzie steal your thunder? Because it seemed to me like Herman Mashaba was the first person out of the gate talking about illegal immigration, that we need to control our borders. Some would say he was the Trump of the South Africa. And then all of a sudden, here comes Gator McKenzie, and he starts talking about it, continuously. And he did very well. I think, didn't he? I mean, I stand on a correction, but I think he did better than your party. So did he steal your thunder?
No, I think not. I think Herman Mashaba has been completely consistent about illegal immigration. I think Gayton McKenzie and the PA have got a much more crass attitude towards immigration. They say, Abahambe, all of them must go. Die hele lot moet gaan. We don't have that attitude. Our policy is very simple. We believe that our country needs immigration. We need scarce skills. We need people to come and invest in this country and create jobs. We want them to come to this country from all over the world. But what we don't want and what we won't stomach is illegal immigration. So Herman Mashaba started in Johannesburg by taking hijacked buildings away from illegal immigrants who were running parallel rental schemes, who were using those buildings for nefarious and criminal activities. And he was called a xenophobe. To the contrary, he was not xenophobic. I mean, if you read his books, if you read our policies, they are certainly not xenophobic, but it's about the rule of law and protecting our borders and the sovereignty of this country and putting South Africans first. When you go to a school and you see parents queuing at the gate of a school to get their children into school like they're doing today, right today, because there are illegal immigrants' children in those schools without papers, without anything, government made it possible for them to do that. When you see our parliamentary member, Lerato Ngobeni, championing spazas for locals, hashtag spaza for locals, the spaza shop industry is the 80 billion rand industry. It's run primarily by illegal immigrants. What are we doing now? We're seeing the ANC running around helter-skelter, registering illegal spaza shops. And we're saying, no, there's a constitution, there's legislation that says if you want to come and invest in this country as a foreign business person, bring 5 million rand with you, and we will give you a visa, and you can come and invest in this country and create jobs, and we'll facilitate that investment and that naturalization. But don't come here and open a hair salon. Don't come here and open a spaza shop with no investment. It's against the law, but our borders are porous. People pour over our borders every day. The only time that our borders in this country are effective is now, while the Limpopo is in flood. The rest of the time, people from Zimbabwe can cross into this country, for example, at will and at their leisure. But right now, the Limpopo is in flood, and we have an effective border between South Africa and Zimbabwe. The rest of the time, there's nothing.
Just help me understand, why is a hair salon not an investment, for example?
The legislation says you must bring 5 million rand. If you want to go and live in the UK and you want to open a business.
Okay, you're talking about the legalities. Okay, I understand.
Legality of it. So there are legislative provisions about who can come into this country. First, you've got to be documented. We've got to know who you are, where you come from, what your investment is, what your plans are. But if you walk across the river with contraband on your back and you want to come and sell that contraband in South Africa in a building that you're renting from somebody who was given an RDP house, that is unsustainable. It's unacceptable. We're seeing our hospitals full of illegal foreigners having babies in our hospitals. They conceive them in foreign countries. They wait until they're in the final trimester. They come into this country, they give birth in our hospitals. We've seen it at our schools. I heard the minister and the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Corrections saying, how? The majority, not the majority, there's a high number of illegal foreigners in our prisons. Now, they shouldn't be surprised at that. We all know that we have the most porous borders in the world. And then you've got parties like the EFF that say that our borders should be open anyway, and everyone's welcome here. How do you cater for the whole of Africa with a budget that is secured from South African taxpayers? It's just not sustainable. And that is our position. It's not negotiable. It's not xenophobic. It's just based on common sense and law. And we are unapologetic about that. We believe charity begins at home, and we put South Africans first in every single respect. And we believe you should only employ a foreigner into a position, especially in government, if there is no South African who can do that job. Because then it's a scarce skill, and there isn't somebody who you can put in that job who comes from your country. Now, I'll tell you why that's important. Because we've got doctors, we've got pharmacists, we've got teachers, we've got graduates standing at traffic lights begging for food because they don't have jobs. They are South Africans. And we've got hundreds of thousands of illegal foreigners making a living in this country, where our own qualified graduates and people like doctors and pharmacists are toy-toying. Today, the pharmacists were toy-toying. Yesterday in the Eastern Cape, at the health head officers in Bishu, doctors were toy-toying because they're unemployed. I spoke to a doctor who is a fully qualified doctor who cannot get a post, who has made applications to perform their role as a doctor completely voluntarily, and she has not been accommodated because there are too many other doctors doing the same thing. Now, how inexplicable is that? So we have to put South Africans first.
Okay. Athol, thank you so much. I see we're running out of time. This has been a very fascinating conversation. The sort of the summary I see is ActionSA, new party, you shot for the moon, as it were, and you believe you still landed amongst the stars. You're going to learn from your mistakes. You're going to consolidate parties, and you're going to really hold the government of national unity accountable and just keep going. That is, I see the sort of the summary to a certain degree of this conversation. Would you want to add anything to that, or any last words?
No, I think you encapsulated our discussion very well. And I just want to make a commitment to you and to the people who listen to your show or watch it, that we are not going to be discriminatory. We actually oppose any form of discrimination around racial discrimination, cultural discrimination, and we're not going to discriminate in Parliament. Our job as an opposition is to hold the executive to account. We're going to keep holding them to account, and we're going to ask them all the same questions, especially in omnibus questions. So around vehicles and travel, we ask every single minister. And then when we receive those responses, we'll respond publicly, because also we're a political party. We had to do a job. We had to convince voters that we will do a job for them. So get prickly about it, and we are not going to give up. We're not going to be intimidated. But more importantly, I think that we are a constitutional democracy. We've got a number of political parties. We have democratic transition. What's happened in Mozambique recently is simply untenable, and we need to make sure it doesn't happen in this country. So we need to keep democracy alive, and we need to keep the government to account. We'll never be in a position that any government believes it's their hereditary life right to be in government. In Mozambique and Zimbabwe, we've seen it happen. Right next door to us in Botswana, an example of a collaboration of a number of political parties under an umbrella that have taken over government in Botswana. That's very encouraging. So I think the signs are good. They're green shoots of developing democracy or strengthening democracy in South Africa. And the party color green. I'm a farmer green. It means that you've had a good season. And we might have been through a dry season in 2024, but I believe that our political fortune will grow and we will have a future in the democracy of this country.